And so, continuing on with the reproductive system, let's now go to the female reproductive system. The female reproductive system's organs produce and maintain female sex cells, or what we call the egg cells or the ova. Transport these egg cells to the location where they can be fertilized by the sperm cells during intercourse, no? And then they provide a favorable environment for the developing fetus. They move the fetus to the outside at the end of its development period, and also they produce the female sex hormones. The ovaries, fallopian tubes, uterus, vagina, accessory glands, and external genital organs are all part of the female reproductive system. Let's go to the ovaries, the primary female reproductive organs or gonads are the two ovaries. Each ovary is a solid ovoid structure about the size and shape of an almond, and they're about 3.5 centimeter in length, 2 centimeter wide, and 1 centimeter thick. The ovaries are located in shallow depressions called the ovarian fossae, one on each side of the uterus. And in the walls or in the lateral walls of the pelvic cavity. They are held loosely in place by a peritoneal ligament. For the structure, germinal or ovarian epithelium is a simple cuboidal epithelium that covers the ovaries on the outside. Thi- This is visceral peritoneum, which surrounds the ovaries. The tunica albuginea, a dense connective tissue capsule, lies beneath this specific layer. The ovary's substance is divided into two parts, the outer cortex and an inner medulla. Due to the presence of numerous ovarian follicles in various stages of development, the cortex appears more dense and granular. An oocyte, or the female germ cell, is found in each follicle. The medulla is a loose connective tissue with numerous blood, lymphatic, and nerve fibers. Let's go to oogenesis. It is just like spermatogenesis in wherein it is a type of meiosis in which female sex cells or gametes develop in the ovaries. The events of oogenesis are similar to those sang spermatogenesis, but the timing and final outcome are different because in spermatogenesis it produces a sperm, and for oogenesis it produces ang aton nga ovum or ang oocytes. And the oogonia develop from primitive germ cells in the ovaries early in the fetal development, and these rapidly divide to form thousands of these ang ginatawag nga oogonia cells, each with a full complement of 46 chromosomes, which are 23 pairs. And after that, the oogonia go through a growth phase. They enlarge and they become primary oocytes. The primary oocytes are, again, they are diploid, having 46 chromosomes, and they begin the first meiotic division. But the process stops in prophase lang muna. And the cells remain suspended until Sana siya ma-activate until puberty. Even though many primary oocytes degenerate before birth, the two ovaries contain approximately around 700,000 oocytes at birth pa lang na. So there will be no more developed in the future. Stock lang da sila anay. And this is in contrast to the male who continues to produce spermatogonia in primary spermatocytes throughout gidya uh, of his reproductive life. The number of primary oocytes has decreased to around 400,000 na lang by puberty. Beginning at puberty, under the influence of follicle-stimulating hormone, ang several primary oocytes, they start to grow again each month. One of the primary oocytes seem to outgrow the others and it resumes meiosis 1. The other cells degenerate and the large cell undergoes an unequal division so that nearly all the cytoplasm, organelles, and half of the chromosomes go to one cell, which becomes a secondary oocyte. The remaining half of the chromosomes go to a smaller cell called the first polar body, and the secondary oocytes begin the second meiotic division. But the process stops naman in metaphase. At this point, ovulation may occur, and if fertilization occur, maproceed na sa meiosis 2. Again, this is an equal division with all of the cytoplasm going to the ovum, which has 23 single-stranded chromosome. The smaller cell from this division is a second polar body na, and the first body also usually divides in meiosis 1 to produce two even smaller polar bodies. If fertilization does not occur kay wala intercourse, the second meiotic division is never completed and the secondary oocytes degenerates. Um, Here again, there are obvious differences between the male and female because in spermatogenesis, four functional sperm develop from each primary spermatocyte. In oogenesis, only one functional fertilizable cell develops from a primary oocyte, and the other three cells are polar bodies and they degenerate. Here in the ovarian follicle development, an ovarian follicle consists of a developing oocyte surrounded by one or more layers of cells called the follicular cells. At the same time that the oocyte is progressing through meiosis, corresponding changes are taking place in the follicular cells. There is what we call the primordial follicles, which consist of a primary oocyte surrounded by a single layer of flattened cells developed in the fetus and are the stage that is present in the ovaries at birth and throughout the childhood. Beginning at puberty, follicle stimulating hormone or the FSH stimulates and changes in the primordial follicles. The follicular cells become cuboidal. The primary oocyte enlarges and it is now a primary follicle. The follicles continue to grow under the influence of follicle stimulating hormone and the follicular cells proliferate to form several layers of mga granulous cells around the primary oocyte. And most of these primary follicles degenerate along with the primary oocytes within them, but usually one continues to develop each month. The granulosa cells start secreting estrogen and a cavity or antrum forms within the follicle. When the antrum starts to develop, the follicle becomes a secondary follicle. The granulous cells also secrete a glycoprotein substance that forms a clear membrane, which is called the zona pellucida. ZONA PELLUCIDA. Zona pellucida, which is nag-form siya around sa oocyte. After about 10 days of growth, the follicle is a mature vesicular follicle na, which forms a blister on the surface of the ovary and contains a secondary oocyte ready for ovulation. Ovulation, prompted by luteinizing hormones from the anterior pituitary, occurs when the mature follicle at the surface of the ovary ruptures and releases the secondary oocyte into the peritoneal cavity. The ovulated secondary oocyte, ready for fertilization, is still surrounded by the zona pellucida and a few layers of cells called the corona radiata. So, if it is not fertilized, the secondary oocyte degenerates in a couple of days. If a sperm passes through the corona radiata and zona pellucida and enters the cytoplasm of the secondary oocyte, the second meiotic division resumes to form a polar body and a mature ovum. After ovulation and in response to luteinizing hormone, the portion of the follicle that remains in the ovary enlarges and it is transformed into a what we call the corpus luteum. The corpus luteum is a granular structure that secretes progesterone and some estrogen. Its fate depends on whether fertilization occurs. If fertilization does not take place, the corpus luteum remains functional for about 10 days. Then it begins also to degenerate into, it becomes corpus albicans, which is primarily scar tissue. And its hormone output ceases or naga-stop. So, if fertilization occurs naman, the corpus luteum persists and it continues its hormone functions until the placenta develops sufficiently to secrete the necessary hormones. Again, the corpus luteum ultimately degenerates into corpus albicans, but it remains functional for a longer period of time if fertilization is successful. There are two uterine tubes, also called the fallopian tubes, in the genital tract, or they are also called the oviducts. There is one tube associated with each ovary. The end of the tube near the ovary expands to form a funnel shaped infundibulum, which is surrounded by finger like extensions called the fimbriae. Because there is no direct connection between the infundibulum and the ovary, the oocyte enters the peritoneal cavity before it enters the fallopian tube. At the time of ovulation, the fimbriae increases their activity and create currents in the peritoneal fluid, and that help propel the oocyte into the fallopian tube. Once nga the oocyte reaches the fallopian tube, the oocyte is moved along by the rhythmic beating of cilia on the epithelial lining and by peristaltic action as well of the smooth muscle in the wall of the tube. The journey through the fallopian tube takes about 7 days because The oocyte is fertile for only 24 to 48 hours. Fertilization usually occurs in the fallopian tube na. Next is the uterus. The uterus is a muscular organ that receives the fertilized oocyte and provides an appropriate environment for the developing fetus. Before the first pregnancy, the uterus is about the size and shape of a pear with the narrow portion directly inferiorly. After childbirth, the uterus is usually larger, then it regresses after menopause. The uterus is lined with the endometrium. The stratum functional of the endometrium sloughs off during menstruation. The deeper stratum basal provides the foundation for rebuilding the stratum functional. Amo nang shed out or sloughs off during menstruation or period. Next is the vagina. It is a fibromuscular tube about 10 centimeter long that extends from the cervix of the uterus to the outside. It is located between the rectum and the urinary bladder, as you can see in the illustration. Because the vagina is tilted posteriorly as it ascends and the cervix is tilted anteriorly, the cervix projects into the vagina at nearly a right angle. The vagina serves as a passageway for menstrual flow, receives the erect penis during intercourse, and it is the birth canal during childbirth. Next, the external genitalia. The external genitalia are the accessory structures of the female reproductive system that are external to the vagina, sagwa sa vagina. So they are also referred to as the vulva, or ang other term for vulva is pudendum. The external genitalia, it includes the labia majora, mons pubis, labia minora, clitoris, and glans within the vestibule. The clitoris is an erectile organ similar to the male penis that responds to sexual stimulation. Posterior to the clitoris, the urethra, vagina, paraurethral glands, and greater vestibular glands open into the vestibule. All right, for female sexual response and hormone control, the female sexual response includes arousal and orgasm, but there is no ejaculation. A woman may become pregnant without having an orgasm. FSH, or the follicle stimulating hormone, the LH, or the luteinizing hormone, estrogen, and progesterone have major roles in regulating the functions of the female reproductive system. At puberty, when the ovaries and uterus are mature enough to respond to hormonal stimulation, certain stimuli cause the hypothalamus to start secreting gonadotropin releasing hormone. This hormone enters the blood and goes to the anterior pituitary gland where it stimulates the secretin of the follicle stimulating hormone and the LH as well, the luteinizing hormone. These hormones in turn affect the ovaries and the uterus. And also the monthly cycles begin. A woman's reproductive cycle lasts from menarche ang term to menopause. No? Menarche to menopause. Here, you can see the ovarian cycle phases. The monthly ovarian cycle begins with the follicle development during the follicular phase, continues with ovulation during the ovulatory phase, and it concludes with the development and regression of the corpus luteum during the luteal phase. The uterine cycle takes place simultaneously with the ovarian cycle. The uterine cycle begins with menstruation during the menstrual phase, continues with repair of the endometrium during the proliferative phase, and ends with the growth of glands and blood vessels during the secretory phase. Menopause occurs when a woman's reproductive cycles stop. This period is marked by decreased levels of ovarian hormones and increased levels of pituitary follicle stimulating hormone and the luteinizing hormone as well. The changing hormone levels are responsible for the symptoms associated with menopause. Let's go to the mammary glands. It is also a part of the female reproductive system. Functionally, the mammary glands produce milk. Structurally, they are modified sweat glands. So, the double function. So, mammary glands, which are located in the breast overlying the pectoralis major muscles, they are both present in both sexes, male and female, but usually are functional only in the female. Externally, each breast has a raised nipple which is surrounded by a circular pigmented area called the areola. The nipples are sensitive to touch due to the fact that they contain smooth muscle that contracts and causes them to become erect in response to stimulation. Internally, the adult female breast contains 15 to 20 lobes of glandular tissue that radiate around the nipple. The lobes are separated by connective tissue and adipose tissue. The connective tissue helps support the breast, and some bands of connective tissue called the suspensory ligaments or the Cooper's ligaments, they extend through the breast from the skin to the underlying muscles. The amount and distribution of the adipose tissue determines the size and shape of the breast. Each lobe consists of lobules, pagid, mas gamay, that contain the uh, glandular units. A lactiferous duct collects the milk from the lobules within each lobe and carries the milk to the nipple. Just before the nipple, the lactiferous duct enlarges to form a lactiferous sinus or the ampulla, which serves as a reservoir for milk. After the sinus, the duct again narrows and each duct opens independently in the surface of the nipple. Mammary gland function is regulated by hormones, of course. At puberty, increasing levels of estrogen stimulate the development of granular tissue in the female breast. Estrogen also causes the breast to increase in size through the accumulation of adipose tissue. Progesterone, it stimulates the development of the duct system. And during pregnancy, these hormones enhance further development of the mammary glands because do nag-double work, no? Prolactin from the anterior pituitary stimulates the production of milk within the glandular tissue, and oxytocin causes the ejection of milk from the glands. That's it for those are the major parts of the female reproductive system.